This is the Gauntlet podcast. My name is Jason. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Lowell Francis. Hi, Lowell.
Hey, Jason.
And this is our monthly Gauntlet Hangouts Roundup. This month on the Roundup, we are joined by community member, game designer, author of the recently released and frankly fabulous Storm Riders, available in Codex Joy 2, Michael Barford. Michael, hi. Welcome to the Gauntlet podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm starting to get used to that title.
Yeah, no, you should. Storm Riders is really, really good. So, listeners, we are going to discuss some of the games that we played in November. We are going to then take a look at the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar in December and highlight some games there. And then we're going to end, as always, with Giving Me Life. So, Lowell, kick us off. How was your November?
So, despite the holidays and that bumping things, it was pretty good. Off Gauntlet, did Urban Shadows, A Trail of Cthulhu, 13th Age, and the Changing the Lost PBTA hack. And then on Gauntlet, another month of a series of Hearts of Wulin. And then I also did Blackout, which is about the Blitz, and Bubblegum Shoe, and The Witcher pen and paper tabletop RPG. I considered doing Blackout, but I think I want to write something up about that because I think it's a really interesting piece. So instead, I decided to do the game that everyone keeps asking me about because I ran it.
I assume that's
The Witcher.
The Witcher. Okay, good.
So I have a number of caveats before I go into this. First of all, this game is not for me. It's about a video game series that I only have a passing knowledge of. And it's also using a system that is a little bit crunchier than I'm comfortable with. But I ran it because one of my goals is to try out some new things which might not otherwise get run on the Gauntlet. And I always like seeing new systems. My niece and nephew love The Witcher. That's one of their favorite video game series. So why not, find out some things about it? And it's also written by Mike and Lisa Pondsmith. And of course, Mike Pondsmith is a creator of Cyberpunk 2020 and Castle Falkenstein and a number of other games, and is really important to how I developed as a gamer. So I wanted to look at what he'd done because he broke real ground in the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's putting it lightly, right?
Yeah, and amazing stuff. And he's gotten a lot of attention recently with Cyberpunk 2077 being done by CD Projekt Red, which of course is also the company that does the Witcher video game. And it's a game that a lot of people have asked me about, have written me, people that I wouldn't have thought would be interested in it that have written me to ask me what I thought about it.
I mean, it's way more mainstream than what we normally cover, right?
Yeah. And I've done some trad stuff, some stuff that's been pretty trad. I did Rollmaster and I ran Conan for us, and I've tried some other stuff like that. This is pretty trad. It is trad all the way down. It's a variation of the Cyberpunk / interlock system. So we've got a D10 rolled plus stat plus a skill versus a task number. And that's sort of the basics, because there is a lot of other, what's the best way to put it? Stuff, I think is the only word I can say, that's going on in it. So the premise for those who aren't familiar with The Witcher is this is a sort of a dark European setting with monsters, and the Witchers of the title are this order of kind of mutants that fight against that. And they use the term mutants, which is why I'm deliberately using it. I don't understand it particularly, but essentially they have some magical talents. They fight against monsters. These monsters aren't actually from our world. They're from a parallel dimension. There's a whole lot of politics to it. It's actually based on a series of Polish novels that were then, the license was given over to CD Projekt Red, and they've really built that franchise up. The author has continued to generate new novels and capitalize on that. And they're really well done. They're big open world games. Now, there's some things I like about The Witcher pen and paper game. One is that I love a good source book. Like the Dragon Age tabletop RPG is a little crunchier than I like, but boy, it has a ton of great material. This one has a lot of really interesting, useful bits about who the nations are, what the people are like, what the different cultures are, the things that are going on in that game. So I like that. I like that it's a game that has a doctor and a crafter class. That's not something we see a lot of.
Not in trad games, no, yeah.
Yeah, and they do give them stuff to do, which means that you have to have some granularity there, which I'll come back to. It also has some higher level split roles. Like there comes a point in the skill tree as like the physician or whatever, they have a choice about which direction they want to go in their skill building. And that's kind of interesting. Again, very video gamey. So those are the things I liked.
So like ear, nose, and throat, or
sort of like that.
Oncology. Or something
yeah. The oncologist class for magical cancers. So this book is a mess. I'm going to put it bluntly. This game book is a mess. It is badly designed for information. Things are spread all over the place. There's a set of background stuff, and then there's more background stuff later. Reference things that you need for particular classes aren't nearby where they need to be. Material isn't presented in a clear way. The layout is incredibly 1990s. It really does look like a game from the 90s with some advances in terms of color and things, but it's not good. And even the latest version of the PDF, you still can't turn the backgrounds off. It has bookmarks, but it has no hyperlinks.
Oh, that's what your tweet was about a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah. Because
you had that tweet where it was like something about color character sheets. And I was like, oh, damn, the Storm Riders character sheets are in color. Lol's going to be pissed. I honestly think it's not the color thing, it's the backgrounds. And I think that's a really important thing. And they do now have on the website printer-friendly PDFs for the character sheets. But here's the other big thing. So this is a substantial core book, a big hardcover, 300-plus page core book. And I spent several days distilling down, reading through, and making notes and building a cheat sheet. And literally, the moment I got the cheat sheet done, they released an 8-page errata for the rules. 8-page, 2-column, like 8-point font, like a serious set of errata. And not just like, oh, this should have cost 6 gold pieces instead of 7, but like, hey, a basic resolution system for skills is completely different. And this stun mechanic that is referenced throughout the game is actually going to be handled in a completely different way than we suggested. And hey, I hope you didn't buy the printed version because that hasn't been updated. Wow.
So there are people who bought the printed version now, and they're going to have to go through and mark up a lot.
I mean, can I just ask, just your completely honest opinions, as we're doing super honest opinions right now. My sense of this role-playing game, which bear in mind, completely passing knowledge of it, and certainly this is a pretty cynical hot take, but my feeling was like, oh, this is a cash grab. Like, this is just a total cash-in product. And
I'll tell you why I don't think that's the case. Because Pondsmith hasn't done that. That's not his track record. And this is the first game he's done in a while. And it's clear that he's been working closely with CD Projekt Red. I think this was a project he was interested in. I think, and there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of effort, and there's a lot of love in this. They certainly put the work in, but I also think that they went, crap, we have to get this out before Gen Con.
Maybe that's more what I meant, because it felt like it was announced and then released. Like, I don't remember there being much of a build up to it.
This game needed a few more months of development and editing time for it
sounds
to work.
To me, yeah, this sounds a bit like a AAA heartbreaker or something.
Yeah, I mean, well, and here's the thing is, again, this game is not for me, but even as a veteran of crunchy systems, and this is outside the issues of the whole presentation and rules and so on, this game has so many steps for resolution, for resolving a combat. And then there's some combat maneuvers about whether you want to make double attacks or a strong attack or so on. And there's an attack roll, there's a defense roll, there's modifiers on both of those. If you hit, you have to roll hit location, and that's kind of important. There's criticals that are 4 levels worth of criticals. When you hit someone in a location, there's location-based armor, because each location you might be wearing different armor. And when you do damage to a location, you reduce the effectiveness of that armor. So you've got to track that. And like weapons degrade too. And all of these are important systems because you've got some classes that rely on it and some skills and abilities that rely on it. And if you just say, okay, I'm not going to worry about those things, you can't just cut that. You've got to go through and you've got to slice out a whole bunch of other stuff. There's so many connected systems there. And that bothers me. So that's one thing. I mean, they've got a full-on crafting system. They've got a crafting system where you have to get the components together and you've got to track the components. There are recipes for the different items. They have a whole set of things like that. And then they've got the same thing for alchemy, where you've got different reagents and different types of alchemical things. And you've got to find the recipes for those, and you've got to find plans for things. And here's the bottom line with this game. This game is not trying to be the Witcher RPG. It is not trying to say, hey, here's a chance to play and enjoy and immerse yourself in the world of The Witcher as presented in various media. It is a game that wants to be the Witcher video game. It is an emulation of the Witcher video game, getting all of those details and all of that crunch and all of those systems to the table. And it is a perfect illustration of why computer games do some things very well and pen and paper games do other things very well.
This is actually super interesting, if I can cut in here for a minute, because I recently had a conversation with one of the game design patrons. These are the folks that I meet with once a month to talk about dev editing on their games. And the game in question is trying to emulate a very particular video game, right? I'm trying to say this without calling their name out, but it's trying to emulate a very particular video game. And one of the like really interesting conversations that we've been having is, from my perspective, video games that are role-playing games are compromised vis-a-vis tabletop games, right? Like, that's my view on it. My view, like, the reason why you have these weird robotic quest givers in video games is because we're not here face to face with a human GM who can dispense these things in a more organic way, right? The reason why we have things like fast travel and the reason why certain, skills work the way they do and all that stuff, it's all because the medium of video games cannot yet replicate the tabletop experience, right? And I think that this works in reverse too, right? Like, many of the things we love about video game role-playing games maybe don't translate well to tabletop, right? Like, if you're going to have a crafting system, the crafting systems in video games are fun because the bookkeeping and the math and all that is handled by a computer. So it's an interesting observation, especially as, and now here I'm going to sound like old man Jason, but especially as you have a lot of people who are entering the tabletop hobby having been exposed first to JRPGs and video game role-playing games, right? And I think they bring a particular like, or they're into like a particular aspect of those games that like maybe it can be replicated in tabletop, maybe it can't. I'm thinking of Maria Rivera's game that we published in Codex 100 years ago, Heroes and Crystal Kingdoms. I actually published that and I loved it because, yes, it was doing like this sort of like weird Final Fantasy-esque like job switching and progression, right? But what I loved about it is it kind of really carefully straddled that line between like being tongue in cheek and earnest, right? And so it had this kind of like vibe that I appreciated. It was almost like it had a certain tone, and it embraced its kind of video gaminess, right? And so it was different. So I find this super interesting as just a sort of like tabletop cultural point.
Well, and I think one of the arguments has been made about the popularity and success of 5th edition D&D. is that there were a lot of people that were playing MMOs and things like that got tired of it. They weren't getting the satisfaction that they were getting, but they still wanted that shared experience with their friends. And there's been a lot of argument that that's what brought a lot of people over. And I think there's something to be said on that. And I mentioned Dragon Age before. I think Dragon Age does a pretty good job of smoothing out the rough points, not giving us all the detail. I mean, it's a playable system. It's smartly done. It's a little crunchier than I like. But this game, it feels...
You have to write for the medium, right?
Yeah.
And you got to write for the medium.
And I think it feels to me like this game is from the 90s. Like, I think I said this to maybe to you or to someone before, is that had this come out in the 1990s, I would have loved this game. I would have absolutely loved it. We would have done the alchemy system and all that stuff for a while, and then we would have gotten tired of it. You know, the same impulse that makes you play Ars Magica and track all of the details in that. So I think here's what I'm going to say is, bottom line, if you're looking for resources to play a Witcher RPG, whether you do it with this system, or you do it with Dungeon World, or you do it with World of Dungeons, or you do it with Fate, or whatever, this is a great resource. Buy it as a PDF. Don't buy the hardcover. If you're looking for a game that you're like, oh, I really want to play the Witcher game with the set of rules that I'm buying, I don't think this is that. And I think that there are a lot of systems that could do it, and that this could be a good baseline to work from. But that's sort of my overall thought on that.
Yeah, to the extent it's still a helpful source book and setting material, I think there's something to be said for that for sure. So
I'll tell you the other thing that kind of got me is, and this has started to change my mind about quick starts, because one of the reasons I've run different games and used quick starts is because I wanted to be lazy and not have to do as much work. But the last few quick starts or demo modules I've used, like with Bubblegum Shoe and even with The Witcher and even with Arune, which I liked a lot, they felt very constrained. And it wasn't until I kind of ditched those and did my own thing that I felt like I was getting the game. And especially in this Witcher, the sample module is so 90s, is so go here, do this. If the players object, D6 guards appear, and they will continue to appear until the players are captured. And there's children being kidnapped. And I'm like, oh God, it's stuff like that. So
all I want to know is, do you have to do an extraction, and are there entry vectors?
There are no entry vectors. Well, in fact, that's just surprising. They should have done a whole witch runners thing. So that could be
missed opportunities.
Well, let me ask you this real quick.
Yeah, please.
So I think that one of the greatest strengths of these licensed games is that people who are new to role-playing games, or have never even heard of them or considered playing one, might be a big fan of the Witcher video game and then sees it's the Witcher role-playing game. And it's like, well, I've beat all 14 Witchers, however many there are. I'm not super familiar. I've beat them all and I want to go explore more. I can do this with my friends and we can play in the Witcher world. Do you think that this product delivers on that promise more than, say, if we were to reskin, for me, World of Dungeons would be like my go-to for that, Like, do you think that for someone completely new to this idea, that they would find comfort and familiarity in The Witcher, or would they just be totally
turned off by role-playing games forever?
Yeah, right.
I think the system is complex enough and not like other, maybe they might have familiarity with D&D and those things, but it's different enough and complex enough that I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't use it as an entry point for new gamers. I think there's too much material there. I think there's too much to explain. I think there's an approach to this where you could take this information, this material, and make it friendly to new players and keep that same system, but it will require a completely different presentation of the ideas, completely different order of information, completely different thinking about how you want to teach people. I don't think it's a great game for new players.
Yeah, totally fair. Well, do you want to say anything and wrap up here on this? Well,
I tried it. I really was hoping it would be great. I wanted to give it as fair a shot as I could, but it's a game that's not for me. But I think even setting that aside, I think there's some serious problems with it.
All right, fair enough. Michael, tell us about your November of gaming, please.
Yes, so in November, I was coming hot off of Gauntlet Con, and I was worried that I might need a little bit of a break before I started getting back into playing some games, because I played, like 10 or 12 games over Gauntlet Con.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, that is including, I think it was Thursday, so I had an extra day in there. But I did end up running a 4-session series of All Systems Nominal, as well as I played in a game of Hunt the Wicked, which is, I think it's Ben Dutter.
Yeah.
Rich was running that as part of Star Wars Saturdays, which is really cool because I've participated a lot in Star Wars Saturdays over the past year, and I got a chance to bring back one of my recurring characters.
Nice.
But today, I think I'll be talking a little bit more about All Systems Nominal.
Yeah, you're gonna give us a good overview of that, because we know what it is, because it is a game that has kind of bubbled up from our spaces a little bit. But what is All Systems Nominal?
Sure. So it's an in development, Forged in the Dark game by Kyle Thompson. So it's based on Blades in the Dark, but this game that Kyle's designed, it's more about depicting the struggles of pilots of towering war machines called mecha.
What are these mecha? I'm kidding.
They're giant stompy robots is the basic idea. But we actually had a lot of fun. I made a Pinterest board ahead of time, and people got to pick out their mecha from there and other sources. So there's a pretty wide range of robots that people came out with. One person was just in a large sphere that rolled around on the ground, like a BB-8,
big
basically.
Sphere, nothing wrong with that.
Yes. And then one person was playing like a biological mecha that had like more like fluids and things like that instead of gears. So that was pretty intense. But this series I ran focused on members of a mercenary corps in a hyper-capitalist intergalactic future. So kind of like cyberpunk themes, but in like sci-fi future space with robots sort of thing. The project is currently on hiatus. I think that Kyle mentioned this on the Gauntlet blog in a post on there. And that sort of came after I'd already planned the playtest. So I was like, well, we're running the playtest, so there'll be feedback for you when you pick it back up.
Oh, you weren't the one who was like, Kyle, shut your game down now.
No, it wasn't me. But I will say it's been really interesting because, there's a lot of cool design stuff that's going on in the Slack, and people are sharing their projects that are in development, asking for ideas about it. So I've seen the development process for this game kind of from some of its earliest stages. And I've had a chance to, chat with Kyle about what it looks like and what his goals are with it. Another cool thing that Kyle has been doing is streaming some of his design work. He'll think out loud and kind of type on the thing as it goes along, which was sort of an alien concept to me at the time. I don't know. I think I would feel very self-conscious doing that, but it was really interesting to observe.
I love how much of our modern culture is rapidly becoming just expressing out loud your inner monologue, right? You hear about these stories about people there with their 10-year-old little boys playing video games who are literally narrating the video game as if they were a YouTube streamer, right? This is
right. Or doing unboxing videos.
Right. Yeah. YouTube has done this to us, right? We no longer have inner thoughts that we must put them on video and we must, say our thing. I'm not dinging Kyle at all. I actually think it's a super interesting idea.
But, one helpful thing that he did for me as a game master, he streamed his prep for a game that he ran at Gauntlet Con, one that I actually had a chance to participate in too, which was helpful because it was the first time I got to play it before running his playtest. I was like, maybe I should get a session under my belt. But watching him prep kind of gave me some ideas about when I went to prep for this series, what sort of things I should include and look out for.
That's really interesting. I know Jason's posted some of his prep notes for his sessions, but it hadn't occurred to me to kind of maybe do that in a block in a video. That's really neat. I didn't know he'd done that.
Could be kind of useful, actually, because I think prep is one of the more intimidating parts of GMing for people, and it really doesn't have to be.
Because I've gotten a lot of people ask me how I prep like mystery scenarios, and that's a really cool idea.
As you might imagine, I get asked all the time about like prepping Dungeon World, right? Like it is a constant refrain in my life. Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and it was also very cool to hear his prep for the game and then to play in his session and see what elements of the prep he brought into the game and which ones he needed to, sort of make a call about. And I know at one point he'd planned to have 3 robots show up, but due to time constraints, he cut it down to 1 or 2. So I didn't necessarily have that all going on in my brain during the game, but it was cool to look back on it and to see those elements at play. So as far as what I liked about the game, I just think that there are a lot of nuances in the mecha genre. Like it's a lot more broad. I mean, I'm being a little reductive to just say that it's big stompy robots, like going around shooting lasers at people, because there's a lot of breadth within that genre that appeals to lots of different people. And when I got in touch with my players for this series ahead of time to sort of get everyone on the same page, we had a really nice discussion about what people wanted from the game, what sort of things they wanted to see in this series. I kind of laid out my idea for the series, but we had some players who really enjoyed like some of these, gay aspects of some of these Gundam animes, right? We had these sort of very elegant young men who were getting into shouting matches and then, fighting each other. And I mean, that wasn't necessarily something that I had been inspired by, but I got to take that information and try to incorporate it into the series. And I think that that's what's so appealing about the mecha genre, is that there's so many different things that people can connect to it in different ways.
Does Kyle's game make space for that, like that breadth of genre?
So yes and no is what I would say. There were, I guess what I would say, it's having a little bit of an identity crisis. It's almost a little too broad. So there is space for that, and space for the classic mech warrior people who really are into missiles and ammo and counting things and, keeping track of your special systems and what kind of armor you have, but also wanting to keep combat short and brief in these different ways. And there's some really cool mechanics with like teamwork and trying to direct specific questions to sort of think about your feelings in the middle of an encounter, but it feels a little disconnected. Like there's all these different components, and I don't think it's gotten to the point in development where they're all really meshing together. Was our experience with the playtest.
That's interesting. I mean, I think this sort of like the other end of that, I guess, since we're kind of talking about mecha games, is a PBTA game, but Fraser's game, Never.Do's Best, it has big, giant, stompy robots, right? But that's not what the game is really about, right? Like the game has these robots, but the game is actually about these middle schoolers, and the big robot fights are kind of an expression of their like middle school trials and tribulations and their emotional, drama. And it's inspired by this anime called FLCL, Fooly Cooly. And so I think that's kind of interesting because like, because that game like actually really, really zeroes in on like what it wants to do, right? Like it is not trying to do all of the mecha, right? Like it's trying to do this really particular kind of slice. I haven't talked to Kyle about this game directly much, but I have to imagine he's aware of like kind of that's an issue that's kind of going on with All Systems Nominal.
Yeah. And his most recent kind of update post on the design, he shared a little bit more of his thoughts, his goals with the game, why he wanted to write this game, things like that. And to be fair, I think that this is a problem that's plagued mecha RPGs for a long time. I think that they've always been trying to serve too many masters, I guess, or something like that.
It's the thing, Supers games have that. Science fiction, we've seen this with the various Supers PBTA games and the
sci-fi PBTA
games that don't like narrow down and they serve too many masters. And I think that's a real challenge, but the trick is even when you kind of get it narrowed down, like for my Changing the Lost PBTA, I even had to cut from what, the big thing of Changing the Lost. It's still broad enough that I couldn't cover everything, so I had to narrow it down. I think that's a real challenge on cutting to find what it is the game that you want to run. I mean, I would love to write a game that could do everything, but I think you have to cut to the game that you want to be running.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, it's like write it at the top of each piece of paper, right? This is like educational services advice. Like write the question at the top of the paper. Like, what is my game trying to do? Make sure every design element is reinforcing that answer, right? It's super interesting. I'm not very familiar with mecha as a genre. I don't know it, but I definitely see it in these other genres, right? I think the sci-fi PBTA space is the big one for me. Many of the games that are out there are perfectly functional games. There's nothing wrong with them necessarily, but they are clearly like trying to be everything, and they don't want to be everything. I mean, especially like PBTA, which is all about, not all about, but largely about genre emulation. You can really narrow down the genre, right? We should call it subgenre emulation, right? Like it really should be that, right?
I think part of that too kind of comes from its DNA of the Forged in the Dark system, where you have this basic game, but then you also have these crew playbooks, which sort of help to dial in your experience in each session. If you're playing cultists versus assassins, you're kind of having a different experience, but you still have some of these same core mechanisms, which I think is maybe a little bit what Kyle was going for. And that's been some of his most recent design, is trying to make something similar to that. But it has, its own little independent development hiccups with formatting and things being a little disorganized and things like that.
But it's in development. I mean, whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But Kyle, he's done a lot of research. He's looked into lots of games, has lots of influences. So he's done the work. I think it just needs time.
This 100% makes sense. And honestly, this is a compliment about Kyle, because we've had Kyle on the show before, right? And he's been a member, long time member of the community. We're speaking about Kyle like this because we love him, right?
Yes.
He is such a thoughtful guy, right? Like he's a very thoughtful guy. He has that fantastic podcast that he's on, the GIU, General Intellect Unit. It's so good. And like, he's a very, very thoughtful person. And you can see how a person whose brain works like his does makes a game like this, right? Like there's always going to be, what it needs is a person like me, right? Who like steps in and like starts cutting, like hacking away like a fucking serial killer, right? To get to the beautiful core, right? So that's what dev editing is, right?
And that's something I'm really excited to see from All Systems Nominal in the future, because I know that this game has an emotional core that Kyle is trying to bring into the world. He's talked a lot about how a lot of this influence was from this problematic fandom he had with War Machines as a young man. And he's trying to sort of exorcise those demons through this design, which is so cool.
Kyle Thompson AF. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, that is so him. Yeah.
On that note, I would like to shout out another in development Forged in the Dark game, Mutants in the Night, which is being developed by DC.
Oh, yeah, DC's doing that one, yeah.
I really wanted to run it in January, but like Kyle, they have been doing design streams on Twitch for this game. And I've seen they've released a lot of cool, like, images of maps that they're working on and things like that. And they're coming up with these new ideas. So it's been really cool to sit and watch with that. But after my experience with this playtest, which was overall a fun series, we had a good time, I do think I will wait and see what the next stage of development looks like before I bring it to the table. As far as my series of All Systems Nominal went, I'll say that playing a playtest, playing an in-development game taught me a lot about GMing. It gave me opportunities to practice making on-the-fly adjustments to rules to suit the flow. It encouraged me to have really frank discussions with my players about what they wanted to achieve, what were their desires and goals with this series and with this session. And we also had a lot of really structured debrief that came as part of both wanting to provide a space for people to talk about their feelings after playing with some heavier themes of like war and dehumanization and all those things that come with mecha, but also to talk about feedback for the game. So that was a really great experience. And I think that if you are, I mean, I know that you do this a lot with playing different games, Lowell and Jason, but I think that taking a chance sometimes to play a game that's in development is at the very least going to stretch your muscles as a GM, and I think that's a good practice for sure.
That's a really, really good point.
Awesome. Well, let me talk about my November. I played World of Dungeons using a module by Shao Kahn called The Corruption of Pelarsk. It is fabulous, and we're going to talk about it on Fear of a Black Dragon at some point. I played Hot Guys Making Out, one of my very favorite games, Kaleidoscope, another favorite of mine, and The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, which is what I'm going to talk about. So The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth is a Powered by the Apocalypse game written by Christopher Gray. You play either employees or guests of a Disneyland-inspired theme park called Mouse Park that is ruled by a Lovecraftian nightmare called the Great Mouse. If you're playing employees of the park, the game is about sort of putting out fires, supernatural fires, suppressing the dark, horrific things that take place at Mouse Park so that the public doesn't get wind of it. If you're a guest, you are just simply trying to survive some of these terrible, dark occurrences. The game clearly takes a lot of inspirations from different places. Mechanically, it takes a lot of inspiration from Monster of the Week. He says that right in the text, particularly in the way that you structure each session. It's kind of like the Monster of the Week mystery process. It's very similar. It also takes inspiration from things like Five Nights at Freddy's, the video game, and obviously like, Disney characters and things like that. So what did I dig about The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth? First and foremost, the tone and the subject matter of the game. It's A+. I don't know how else to put it. It is just like absolutely A+. It is like what I love in gaming. It is the game was kind of written for me, right? Like I love it. It's really interesting because they talk about in the text, you can play this kind of dark and horrifying, or you can play it as satire, right? And I actually think it works as both. In our sessions, we did both. Like it was scary, but it was also like very obviously satirical, right? And a little like kind of gonzo and over the top. And in the way that the game just sort of naturally critiques like capitalism and consumerism and kind of things like that, right? So that was something I really loved about the game. The tone, the subject matter, the setting really does a huge amount of work here. The game also uses like piecemeal playbook creation. So there are other Powered by the Apocalypse games that do this. I think Spirit of 77 was one of the first, where you take different elements like your background, your career or whatever, your personality, and you combine them, you mix and match them to make a unique playbook. I normally absolutely hate this in Powered by the Apocalypse games. Like, I don't normally like this in PBTA games. I actually like it here because in the context of this game, because the game is not genre emulation, it actually kind of makes sense that you're basically just playing like two, broadly speaking, kind of generic playbooks, right? Guests and employees. And it's just like, what type of guest are you? What type of employee are you based off your personality and things like that? And so because you're kind of just playing like normal people, I think it's okay to have this kind of like piecemeally playbook situation because there aren't really any, it wouldn't be easy to do like defined, traditional PBTA style playbooks, right? That are really, really about like selling genre. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And remind me, what do these playbook pieces look like, for example?
In the Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, you choose your personality. A little fun detail is that according to the researchers at Mouse Park, there are 4 personality types in the world, right? And you actually like select your personality based off a little kind of like interview that you do with the player. And that's how you kind of choose your personality. So you choose your personality and that has some moves that you can choose from. Then you choose your work history and that has some moves you can choose from. And then whether you're a guest or an employee, it also has its own set of moves. So you kind of like have moves coming from these 3 different places, basically. So I actually kind of like that more than I thought I would. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, but then it was okay. Again, I think the setting does a huge amount of work in this game. I mean, the way the material is presented, the way Mouse Park is presented, the sort of like clever references to like Disneyland lore. It's very like Disneyland with the serial numbers filed off, right? The artwork, like just the way it's all presented is so great. And all the little references, the names of moves, like it's just, if you are a Disney fan with like a strong taste for black or gallows humor, you are going to love this book, right? That's the major thing I love about this game is like, yeah, just the setting does so much work and the way it's presented is just really fantastic.
I do want to, with the presentation, I want to say something because it's a thing that happened because I backed the Kickstarter and I got the physical copy and I'm old and I think the game is great. I think it's laid out really well. I think the art is dynamite. He does make one choice in terms of presentation that actually caused me a serious problem.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
He uses silver ink to do like some of the examples and stuff and explanations in certain sections. And I literally, on the physical page, I have a very hard time reading it unless I'm in the right light. I actually wrote and asked him, and he sent me another copy. Christopher was super generous about it. And I feel bad saying this, but it is one of the things that it was a choice that actually caused me to have some accessibility issues with the printed copy.
Oh, that's super interesting. I didn't run into that, but I think it's because I probably skipped whole big huge portions of the book.
Yeah,
right?
it was for me, and I think I am old. But Sherry and I were both like, oh, this is hard. I would definitely, if I were going to run it and have to reference to the table, I would definitely want to make sure I had strong light, and that's literally my only critique of it. Because everything else is so cool, and I want to echo what you're saying, but I did want to mention
from a
that.
presentation standpoint, the artwork, it's just so on point. Like it's just so dynamite. Like when you hear Lovecraft smashed up with Disneyland, and like whatever that conjures up in your brain, that's what this book is, right? So it is what it says on the tin. The main thing I had with this game, the kind of the issue that I ran into, I do think that there are too many moves. This is
too many notes.
Too many notes. It was beautiful. I loved it. Presentation was fantastic. Too many notes. There were too many moves. I mean, this is my thing. I think in general, Powered by the Apocalypse games have too many moves. And I think my biggest issue in particular, because I did feel like there were too many moves, some of the moves, in my opinion, there were some missed opportunities. Many of the moves had like defined 6- results that didn't really kind of go anywhere. A lot of the outcomes on the dice were just very strictly mechanical, right? And, we were, because everybody who was playing was kind of a old PBTA hand or whatever, we were like kind of just rolling with that and kind of adding in all of the implied fiction as we played. But in terms of like fictional goal posting. Some of the moves like weren't doing it right. There was one move that was essentially like a spell that you cast, right? And it was happening at this like really great moment where this park guest, who had managed to be in the wrong place routinely and seeing like things she was not supposed to see routinely, was watching some horrific shit go down from like she was watching through the crack in a bathroom stall door, right? And she witnessed all this. And so they're going to cast this spell to get the Great Mouse to kind of finally, occlude her, right? So she wouldn't like, say what she saw. And so the spell's getting cast. I'm super hype. The 6- comes up and the result is nothing happens. Nothing happens, mark twinkle, which is one of the stats. And I was like, no. I was like, no, that is not what's happening here. I'm disregarding that. Something is happening. And then I made something happen, right? So there are a few moments like that where if there was ever going to be like a 2E of this game, I think that like some of the moves could definitely stand to be like kind of addressed and kind of like given just a little bit more fictional oomph, right? But all in all, we had a blast. We had a really good time. More than probably any game I've played in like the last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
No, I don't mean like the fun necessarily, but what I was about to say is more than any other game in the last 6 months, this game, the setting does so much work. Like it's off the charts, like how evocative it is and how it instantly puts you in the headspace and you instantly begin having conversations about like, what does it mean to be at scary Disneyland, right? And so, I mean, Christopher landed on a really cool idea, and that's just kind of the deal. Another takeaway for me is that I feel suddenly inspired to write a smaller, tighter, more focused kind of version of this, but for my Calamities Raccoon setting. And I indeed may do that for my ever ballooning, ever exploding Calamities Raccoon Codex Kickstarter stretch goal.
Nice.
Yeah, I loved it. Had a blast with it. In terms of like its mechanical soundness as a PBTA game, there are definitely some bumpy spots, but at the end of the day, we're here to have fun, and delivered. My
partner has shared some really great Disneyland creepypastas.
Oh my God, I'm here for that.
And they are, some of them have been like, read for podcasts and things like that, but those and like the Five Nights at Freddy's / Chuck E. Cheese creepypastas, oh, they're so juicy. So I think this is a really cool game.
And Christopher calls out the creepypastas as an inspiration. I mean, you can see why I love this game, right? I mean, my whole thing with like Chuck E. Cheese's is a thing I've talked about a million times. My other game that is never going to happen that I spent a lot of time on, Public Access, which is inspired by creepypastas and things like that. Like, this game is for me, right? Like, and I had a huge amount of fun with it. Boy, oh boy, if he ever wants a co-author for 2E though, man, I am there. I'm there in a minute to make that happen. That's kind of all I wanted to say about it. Folks should definitely go check that out. Shall we move on to December?
Absolutely.
So we are taking a look at the December calendar. Well, what's looking good?
So Jason Pete's running After the War, his game of mimetic horror, which at the time of recording has just funded on Kickstarter. He's super nice. I'm really excited that he's running this for us. I've met him at Metatopia and Origins. I like him a lot. And it's cool that he's come in and is going to be showing it off to people. I really like that's happening.
Fantastic. Michael, what is exciting on the calendar in December?
Yeah, so my pick for this is going to be The Sword, the Crown, the Unspeakable Power, Wreathe Your Hands with Blood. I'm a sucker for a series with a long name, and Agatha is running this, and Agatha is an awesome GM, and very proud that she came through Mandatory Fun Club, and
is she a graduate of MFC? To run her own
game. She's a graduate. It brings a tear to my eye as a coach.
She also has a dynamite lineup of players for this game.
She does have a very, very good lineup of players. Probably the best lineup of players, if I'm being honest.
Yes, for the whole year, absolutely.
Yes. namely Jason and Lowell, if listeners were uncertain.
It's going to be awesome.
I did not get it.
I remember all the names being really exciting.
Oh,
actually,
yeah, all of them.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
And even the wait list is dynamite. Like, I want whoever's on the wait list to like.
It's a superstar wait list.
Yes.
Yes. and I also just want to. I mean, that's the big one. Sword the Crown, Unspeakable Power is really interesting game that kind of has some similarities to Dungeon World, but is moving in a different direction. But I would be remiss if I didn't also cover Jim Crocker, another Mandatory Fun Club alumnus, running Zombie World. So shout out to him as well.
Nice.
Awesome. Let's go to Giving Me Life. Hi, listeners. I want to take a minute to tell you about the newest issue of Codex, the Gauntlet's RPG magazine. It's called Codex Dark 2, and it's a sequel to the original Codex Dark. Here is what you'll find inside. Ghost Drums, a story game / LARP about vengeful ghosts that deals with themes of colonialism and regret. A Repast of Glum Moments, a collection of inspirational morsels for Swords Without Master and other dark fantasy fiction. Trophy, a psychological horror game about a group of explorers pushing ever deeper into a forest that doesn't want them there. Orchestra of Oblivion, which features new bloodlines for the excellent gothic horror game Rhapsody of Blood. Our newest miscellany, 3 dozen constellations, 8 beautiful illustrations, and a custom layout by Jake Householder. You can get Codex Dark 2 by pledging $4 on the Gauntlet Patreon by December 31st. And a reminder, back issues of Codex are available on DriveThruRPG. Thanks. Hey, it's Giving Me Life. Lowell, what's Giving You Life?
So I've never been exactly like the hugest Mystery Science Theater fan. I've liked it. I've got some episodes that I enjoyed. When they did the reboot last year, I watched it and I dug it. There were a few episodes I didn't watch, but this for Thanksgiving, they came out with a 6-part reboot for Netflix, Mystery Science Theater 3000, The Gauntlet. And the episodes were great. The shows were super, super fun. The movies they picked were great. And you also got to hear them go, The Gauntlet, like that repeatedly in the early episodes. And I want that as my ringtone.
Oh my God, that's so good.
It's really good. I had so much fun watching it. I think it's one of the things I was looking forward to. Like when I finished doing Thanksgiving dinner, that's what I sat down and watched, was like the first 3 of those. And it was so much fun.
That word just has such a great glottal stop.
The Gauntlet.
The Gauntlet. I love that.
Michael, what is Giving You Life?
Giving Me Life this week has been a television show called Flea Market Flip. It's on Hulu and probably some other cable news network, or well, maybe not news, but cable television, which I no longer can afford as a millennial. Anyway,
millennials. My sister and I laugh about all the stuff that millennials are destroying. It's like a running joke with my sister. I
heard they killed American cheese today. That's the one I read today.
Yeah, I'm sure millennials are going to destroy manual doors and things of that nature. It's all going away. But Flea Market Flip is a show with a designer who hosts the show, and then 2 teams of 2 come together. They're given a budget at a flea market, and they need to pick up different pieces of furniture, and they try to redesign them, upcycle them, to then later sell at a future flea market. And I am a big fan of all these reality competition TV shows, Great British Baking Show, things like that, because they give me an opportunity to become this armchair expert on all things flea market flipping. I'm oh, you should have asked for $3.25. What were you thinking?
It's armchair quarterbacking, but for shit I like, right? Instead of football, right?
Right. So I take all the faux bargaining of Pawn Stars or Storage Wars, and then combine all the stuff from all the home design shows and house flipping shows on like TLC or HGTV or whatever, and put them in one happy place where I just get to rip on these. These
my
fools.
favorite thing in the world is to sit my lazy ass down in a chair with a bag of Cheetos and critique drag queens for like their imperfect contour, right? Like they've spent like decades perfecting their art, and I'm just like, you look a mess. Yeah, I know how that goes. The thing giving me life is I have very recently, last week, or no, 2 weeks now, I guess, but very recently moved to a brand new city, brand new house. I am delighted. I'm living in Oklahoma City now, which is a fabulous city if you've ever been. It's great. I love it. And I love the house that we're in. I moved in with my sister, and we have this, it's magnificent. It's huge. It's like 4,000 square feet, gigantic ass house. Yeah. I have like my own corner of the house. Yeah. It's amazing. So, the last year has been like majorly complicated for me because I broke up with my long-term partner, and I was just in I was in an emotional haze for like a year basically, right? Where I just was like, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I mean, I still was like working and everything, but I just was like I was in a funk emotionally, like I just felt like, well, honestly, I kind of poured myself into the Gauntlet, which is why the Gauntlet is kind of like really, really like kind of had a really banner year. But for me, it was not a banner year. And, but in the last few weeks, like I am feeling so much more just rejuvenated and like forward facing. And, yeah, it just feels really good. I feel like in a really healthy space. So I'm happy about it. It's literally giving me life.
Awesome. Ken Height's from Oklahoma City.
I know that. Yeah. Actually, I had a local fan took me to lunch the other day, and he gamed with Ken Height back in the day.
Oh, so, wow.
Yeah. He's actually the host of On Board Games, that podcast On Board Games. He's one of the hosts of that.
Neat.
Yeah, Donald Dennis. So yeah, that's what's giving me life. Listeners, that's our show. If you would like to get in touch with us, we are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We have a G Plus community that is going away at some point, but it's still there. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for the Gauntlet. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. We are on Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet. We would love your support there. And I think that's going to be it. Lowell, thank you so much.
Why, thank you, Jason.
Paul, thanks so much for doing the fabulous edit. And Michael, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here.
And listeners, thanks for listening. Take care.